Are the Culling Games a disappointing collection of fights with no real overarching plot? That's a question that's been floating around the JJK community for quite a while now, and in this video, I will be making it my job to answer the question, are the Culling Games all fights and no substance? The first part of this question that I want to cover is whether or not the Culling Games have a significant plot through line. Because there seems to be a general sentiment that unlike the likes of Shibuya or other arcs within the series, the Culling Games lack any form of story direction and is really just an arc that gives the fans mindless fights without any overarching plot or narrative. This is a perspective that I can definitely understand if you get yourself caught up within these smaller scale events going on within the games. If you fail to see the bigger picture and get caught up in skirmishes like Kashimo vs Akari or Yuta vs Ishiguro and Uro, I can really sympathize with your dissatisfaction with the lack of plot that this arc seems to suffer from. Because when looking at the Culling Games on a small scale, it really is just a collection of fights thus far with no real plot direction that is very foreseeable for many fans of the series. However, I do think that your critique of this arc having no plot or no real story stems from a lack of perspective rather than an actual writing issue within the series. In terms of potential plot threads and narratives that Gege has to tie up or explore in some fashion, the Culling Games blow every other arc in the series out of the water. Even the Shibuya incident arc pales in comparison to the ridiculous scope and plot importance that the Culling Games will have. The worst case scenario went down in Shibuya. Gojo was sealed on October 31st, and on November 1st, Kenjaku revealed himself to be the mastermind of all of Jujutsu Kaisen, and after this major reveal, he decides to enact the Culling Games, his own evolution of cursed energy and Jujutsu sorcerers. The fact that this arc even follows such a massive conclusion means that it's almost inherently going to be a very plot and consequence driven arc. The very nature of it is a direct result of an arc that acted as a reveal for the big bad, or at least one of the big bad Jujutsu Kaisen antagonists. How could the games not be super full of structure outside of the context of fights? May I remind you that this arc has posed some of the biggest mysteries the series has to offer thus far, and we haven't even scratched the surface on any of them. What is going on with Kenjaku? What is the real end goal of the Culling Games? Aside from evolution in the vaguest sense, what does he want? Why is he in China talking to the government? Who the hell is Yuki really? What is her plan to remove cursed energy from the world now that Toji's gone? Whose side is she leaning towards? What makes her powerful enough to even be a special grade in the first place? Is her relationship with Tengen relevant to the rest of the events in this arc? Is Tengen even on our side? What is the bomb in the Culling Games? Is it a literal explosion that is going to be set off and catalyze the next stage of the arc? Or is it a character whose presence represents the volatility of a bomb? Is Sumiki okay, or did she potentially become one of the people that were modified for being a vessel like Yuji? Who the hell is Angel, and what are her plans? How the hell are Yuji and Megumi going to get strong enough to live up to their potential? Will Megumi tame Mahoraga sometime soon? Will Yuji gain the ability to use Sukuna's techniques? What the fuck is Sukuna even planning in the background? All of these questions, and literally dozens more, are being set up to be answered within the future of Jujutsu Kaisen, more specifically within the Culling Games and all of its aftermath. In case you forgot, there is not a single arc in the series that can compare to the raw narrative potential that this arc holds. To say an arc like this has no plot means that you've been pulled into the very narrow-minded scope that Gege is placing on you through the fights he's been giving us. Intentional or not, Gege is making many people forget just how big of a deal the Culling Games are by giving us a spectacle that, by previous arc standards, would be insane. For example, Yuta fighting Ishiguro and Uro had the qualities of an arc's climactic battle, but in the face of the immeasurable stakes of the Culling Games, their fight is merely a drop in the bucket. They are but pawns dancing around on Kenjaku's chessboard. So plot is most certainly not something that this arc in particular is lacking. Now, you may have an issue with how Gege is pacing out the plot, and that is a much more reasonable criticism to me. You don't have to like Gege weaving plot details throughout this arc in the way that he is, but saying that this arc of all arcs is devoid of plot, structure, or even narrative purpose is simply incorrect. The stakes are higher and more complex than they've ever been, and unlike the arcs prior, Gojo isn't here to attempt to clean this up. In regard to the fighting aspect of the Culling Games, the main complaints I've seen for them is that they are being used in place of plot, in place of narrative, which, as I established earlier, simply isn't true. For Jujutsu Kaisen especially, fights and conflict are the way in which a story gets told. And outside of that, people do seem to really like the fights and how they've been implemented. There is the sparse criticism here or there that fights are getting repetitive and boring, and while you are free to have that take, I have to personally disagree on that front, just due to the sheer diversity of fights that we've gotten in this arc already. With just the first of the several preliminary Culling Games fights, we have Yuji versus Higuruma, which as a fight doesn't go very heavy on the choreography and actual action itself, but we get properly acquainted with an amazing character, and we get characterization that is honestly some of the best in the series. Out of all the fights in the Culling Games thus far, at least all of the major ones, this is the one that holds the most emotional weight to me. Directly after this, we get a super cerebral fight from Megumi that shows off just how smart and tactical this character really is, and also shows off the writing chops of Gege, being able to write tactical fights on this level pretty casually, it seems. In this conflict, rather than giving us a ridiculously compelling antagonist like Higuruma, Gege opted to focus on giving us multiple twists within the fight that are solely reliant on these characters' wits and ability to trick one another. Megumi, being the bigger con artist than Reggie, was an amazing display of all of his good traits, while still allowing us to see his weaknesses in battle. And while many people don't have this fight very high in their Culling Games preliminary ranking, I truly enjoy what this fight meant for Megumi's future, and this definitely is the most tactical fight of the Culling Games introduction fights. We then get Yuta fucking Okotsu being an absolute badass and showing us why he's a special grade sorcerer hyped up to be the next Gojo. Rather than be extremely tactical like Megumi had to be, or be put on the ropes and almost lose like Yuji, Yuta shows out and puts all of these powerful foes in their place. The fight does a pretty good job of fleshing out the likes of Uro and Ishigori, making them both compelling in their own right. In my opinion, both more compelling than someone like Reggie. Ishigori especially is a favorite new character of mine, and his desire for dessert, being the reason he came back, is one that ties with the themes of Jujutsu Kaisen in a very overt yet natural way. The moment where Yuta decides to fight Ishigori on unfavorable terms just because of how sincere he was is still one of the coolest moments in the entire series, and I stand on that. Now, while I would say that the outcome of this fight was a foregone conclusion for most fans, the ridiculous hype that came along with reading this fight weekly and getting new Yuta abilities unveiled is almost unmatched, and it definitely holds the title of the most hype preliminary fight. Following that thrill, we have Kashimo vs Akari, which, as of the time of recording this video, is the most recently finished fight, and the one that completely relies on the charisma of the two sorcerers in question. Both Kashimo and Akari are such fun characters that I never once felt bored throughout my experience reading it. Kashimo nearly killing Akari just for him to get fucking robbed by Akari's skillful luck, and Kashimo elevating his game even further was a cycle that I personally never got tired of. They elevated each other due to their banter and general demeanor in the battle. And considering this is the fight where Kashimo dropped a couple fucking bars as well, I could definitely say that this was not only the most fun fight in the Culling Games, but it was also the least predictable. Unlike the other fights, I never really felt assured in a character's victory until the fat lady sang. And even when she did, Gege was able to deliver us a conclusion that worked in both Hikari and Kashimo fans' favor. And even now, we are in the midst of Maki and Naoya's scuffle, which I don't doubt will be an amazing fight in its own right. In each and every one of these battles, Gege gives us something that is spectacular in its own right. The fights are never great for the exact same reason as the last, and that helps keep them fresh, even with their frequency. Now, when re-asking the question I posed at the beginning of the video, are the Culling Games all fights and no substance? My answer would be a pretty solid no. This arc is filled with the most plot threads that the series has ever seen, and the breadth of the plot is being hidden by the fights laid out thus far, at least in my personal opinion. Both the fights and substance are there, and that is what makes it such an exciting arc to see unfold weekly. I think in part a lot of the apprehension for this arc comes from people reading it weekly, and while that is how manga and JJK, or at least in Weekly Shonen Jump, are meant to be consumed, I do think that this is a specific arc, like the Shibuya Incident arc, that will do well for itself upon a binge read for many people. I can completely understand if this arc currently is not to your liking for reasons of pacing or fight placement, but I can confidently say that for me, this arc is still cooking, and even in this build-up phase, Gege has given us a lot to ponder and think about in a way that not many authors currently making manga can. If you did enjoy this discussion and analysis of the Culling Games, and enjoyed this video overall and want to see me talk about Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, and many other manga on the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you are notified too when I upload. But with that being said, I'll see you in the next one.